You can't build a great culture by ripping into each other and allowing other people to rip into each other. Because as soon as they actually realize that that's okay, then all of a sudden you got a bunch of people around, and then that just starts to really ruin the beauty of a culture, and productivity starts to fail, and people aren't happy. And if people aren't happy and motivated, they're not going to thrive.
All right, you're going to love this interview. I just had Jason Oates, the Chief Business Officer for LiveIntent, on the podcast today. He went into some really, really cool areas. Fascinating company, talked about balance, talked about his relationship with the CEO, talked about how to evaluate ideas internally when a company's scaling. They've got about 275 employees right now. Got into a lot of stuff around strategy and core values, talked about bad revenue and how to have defensible revenue, and then talked about how to be a lot harder on the issues and softer on people. Some really great wisdom stuff in there as well. So you're going to love the episode. We'll see you on the inside. Interestingly enough, he is only the first company in history to ever have two guests from the same company on. About 2 years ago, we also had Brett Pinniger, who was the Chief Operating Officer, on as a guest as well. Strange that we actually made this happen, but you're going to love the episode. We'll see you on the inside. So Jason, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, same. It was fun to actually just kind of go through some of the initial information that you sent over to us. And what I'm most intrigued about is how you and one of your close friends have kind of built this out almost from the get-go and had done other things together. And what do you think it is that has allowed you to stay friends through this long journey?
I met my wife in like April of 1999, met Matt 2 weeks later, and basically married both of them. Not long after that, we became close friends right away, and we just started debating ideas and throwing up stuff, and ended up working together at Daytran Media, built multiple companies within Daytran Media, together. And when he left, we did that for about 6 years together. Then he left and started LiveIntent 1.0, which I won't go into what that does. But asked me to come over, didn't like the original business. We pivoted the business together, came up with several ideas, sold the pivot through the board, and then I came on as president. But, we've been together, working closely together and close friends since April of 1999. And I think the reason that we get along so well is, one, I think our brains operate a little bit alike. We're a little bit different. And so, we're pretty hyperactive. I won't label us, but anyway, we have a lot of energy, and we see the world really differently in a lot of times the same ways. And we see this, kept on identifying the same kind of issues, and we like working on this, certain things together. But there's also just a lot of sheer, just respect, trust in each other. We've never burned each other. We don't talk shit about each other, treat each other well as friends. And then that same energy goes into our business relationship. I see no difference between a business relationship and a relationship with anybody. It's treat people very well and treat them like you'd like to be treated. And then when we do debate and we argue, we'll do that, but we do it respectfully. And it might get heated because we're both passionate. We're both probably two of the most impatient people, at least within the company, according to some surveys that we've taken on these personality tests. Like, we're exceedingly impatient, but it works, because we understand each other.
Well, it's because everybody else is too slow. It's not because we're impatient. It's just because they don't move fast enough.
It's really one of our biggest strengths and one of our biggest weaknesses, always.
That's so true of all of them, right? So you said something that I liked, and it was that you don't talk shit about each other. And I was speaking to the client recently, and I said that sarcasm doesn't scale. That, when there's 2 or 3 in a room, you can be sarcastic with your buddies, but as soon as you start doing it around others, it doesn't scale. Is that just part of your normal DNA, that you just you can be fun and laugh, but you're good to people?
Yeah. I'm not very good at I learned early on that I wasn't very good at it, and I never got any benefit from it.
Right.
It just doesn't seem to work. I feel like you lean in with love, kindness, respect, have some emotional intelligence, and really try to have an open heart and mindset around someone. You just learn so much more in that modality than the opposite of that. Well, and I also think it just eventually erodes. Eventually something's going to be said that can't be unsaid.
Yeah.
And that is just the beginning of an erosion of a relationship. And as you pile that on, eventually, maybe when you're younger, it's funny, but eventually it gets really tiresome. And then it usually kind of is the beginning of the end.
I don't even think it's so funny as younger. We just don't know any better yet, right? Canadians have a very hard time with it. Canadians are famous for sarcasm. I'm Canadian, and And it's kind of I forget who it was, but they said it's the lowest form of wit and just doesn't scale at all inside of a company. In starting out as friends together, you said something, and you said that, we're not going to go into what LiveIntent did before, but it wasn't really the model you liked. And then you decided to get involved in the model you did like. Is that again speak to kind of your core values or your cultural fit, or was it more the DNA of like your skills matched the new model better, or what was that?
I think that, Matt and I had spent 8 years or more very, very deep in the world of email. We had built the largest list management company in North America. We ran a ESP, email compliance company. Like we were very steeped in affiliate network. Like, all this stuff was really centered around email. And so we really do understand that channel and its impact on marketing and advertising and everything else. And so we had been thinking about this idea for like 10 years. Wasn't like, hey, but when we said, okay, let's come up with some ideas for a pivot, there was a summer we were like for 3 months, just every weekend we were sitting in his room, driving our wives and our new babies crazy because we had to pivot. We had to come up with something. So literally every weekend, spending time at LBI in his bedroom instead of out in the water or at the beach, we went back to this idea. How do you become the largest email company in the world that doesn't have any email addresses? It doesn't have to send any email. That would be really cool, right? How do you do that? Right? Because the worst parts of sending email in our perspective was actually being in email was deliverability, getting the email into the inbox, engaging consumers, and then having all of that personal identifiable information in your systems that could be hacked, and it's just dangerous. It's just kind of like, we really don't want that. And what we came up with, and we had been talking about this before, was we could do ad serving in emails so that we never have to send anything. We could let the New York Times send it. And then when someone opens up the New York Times and turns on images, we could do real-time decisioning and then place content or advertising or marketing messages in that. And if we got every publisher in like North America doing that, that could be huge. And if we're the only ad server that works in email, now we're the Dart of 1998 that actually is the first ad server that ever worked on the web. Because before that, I started in 1996. The world was hard coding ads on websites. There's no ad serving. There's no site ad serving. It was hard coded. So you get every impression, like no targeting.
Yeah.
Well, they fixed that, back then, but that had never been done in email. And so we were like, we could be the only company with the drill bit that actually gets down into the gold of, that we want to get. And if we're the only ones there, and Apple can't do it, and Google can't do it, and Verizon can't do it, like that'd be a pretty strong position. Because what we learned in the 90s is the first mover in ad serving, it's a commodity. It becomes commoditized pretty quickly. So even though the competitors come across, you're probably not going to get unseated unless you're a jerk, unless you're being bad service and you're raking people over the coals, you're being greedy. So we decided right out of the gate, let's not be greedy. Let's provide amazing service, give them no reason to replace us. And that way when competition comes, we're in a really good, strong position to kind of hold the land grab that we just grabbed.
Do you carry that kind of level of strategic thinking? And I'm using the word strategic thinking versus strategic planning carefully. Do you have that kind of thought process around strategy or strategic thinking in the day-to-day of the business too, where Yeah,
I think this is more in the nature of, both have to happen. But the strategic thinking, the ideas and the things that come out of reframes and insights that maybe other people aren't seeing is more interesting. But it can also be really powerful. The planning is like, you're planning against the idea has to be solid. It has to be inspiring. It has to make people think and have like a delightful, like, oh, like that's usually what we're trying to find when we're trying to find new product or something. Because if it has that wow or like, holy factor, I think then it's got a good chance of at least getting the attention of people. But I think a big part of that is where can we actually provide something where it is really hard for anybody else to actually do that. So we don't like bad revenue. Bad revenue is an idea you can implement, you can maybe make a bunch of money, but then it's going to erode because a bunch of other people are going to do it. And so if the thinking isn't there and the ideas aren't there, eventually you're going to end up on a treadmill or worse than that.
Totally.
So we really like good revenue, which is sustainable revenue that can continue to build and then be as like an annuity.
So in terms of you running the business as kind of the chief business officer and best friend or super close friend as CEO, how much time do you build into your calendar? What percentage of your time do you build into your calendar to think and to be strategic versus like in the day-to-day execution in meetings?
I like how you said built into your calendar because that's exactly what I do. If I have an idea, people know but I'm definitely ADHD, which means I've got a lot of ideas that are coming in. And so if an idea comes in that I think is, oh, that's really interesting, if I think about that idea, 2 or 3 times, well, that's because it's actually, there's something there. Because if it's
Mm,
not, I'm going to stop. It's like, it's a waste of time. I don't like to waste my time thinking about things that don't matter. But I'll write it down and I'll put it in my calendar, give myself an hour, give myself a half hour, and literally just sat down and then just brain dump and
mhm,
really just
mhm.
go and hyper focus on that idea, like not anything else in. Then if I feel like there's a there, I might do it again and then maybe invite someone to have a debate. Call Matt, be like, hey, I've been thinking about this.
I love it.
And then just kind of go off and then we'll just go off together. And, it's like, is there a there? What do you think? If there is, then he'll usually be like, all right, go after that.
I like that you actually put it in your calendar and spend the time on it. And then you said that you hyper focus. It's interesting. So I have 17 of the 18 signs of attention deficit disorder clinically diagnosed. My ex-wife used to joke saying if I was paying attention during testing, it would have been 18 for 18. And then I heard somewhere that I have HD ADD. I've got the high definition attention deficit disorder. I can't focus, but when I do, it's crystal clear. So I notice that I can focus for like 15 to 30 minutes, really tunnel into something, and then I get distracted or bored or my mind's racing, or I have to switch places in the company. I got to sit somewhere else and I got to move around and sit in a different zone, which I don't know, it feeds my brain in a slightly different way.
It's just like a slight dopamine hit.
Yeah.
That change of space can just be like a little bit of a, I think just a feeder to satisfy the
It's a
need to
new
change the
distraction.
subject.
I love working out of coffee shops. We live globally now, and we were in 23 countries last year, and I'm still building my companies and doing everything I'm doing. And I love to be able to sit. I just wrote my 6th book that comes out next week called The Second in Command. And I did a lot of that work in coffee shops because I had to focus because there's so much distraction that it was amazing. And I got to keep drinking espresso, which is good. I'm sure that the whole like time of building the company LiveIntent with Matt has been easy, right?
Yeah, it's been a cakewalk. There's been no issues.
No.
And 12 years of just bliss.
Bliss, yeah.
Bliss.
Wedded bliss, yeah. So how do you have because I think you mentioned it, the healthy debate, the good debate, and how do you work through the conflict, the natural conflict and frustrations? Can you walk us through some examples?
Yeah, I think that, and also as a group, it's not just, it's definitely not the Matt and Jason show. And I'm not taking, responsibility for anything other than what I do. And actually, I'll give some credit to someone. I'll give credit to our current COO, who is Brett Pinniger. He was a consultant with Matt and I on our last business, Daytran Media, Net Margin, all that stuff, Storm Post, was a bunch of businesses within a business. And, he would come in and we would work with him either once to sometimes up to 4 times a year and have him come in and do like full day, 2-day offsites where we would align. When you're building something from scratch and there's a lot of iteration, a lot of change, and a ton of debate, it's going to happen. So just meeting and doing planning, like big planning sessions once a year doesn't cut it. Literally having to do that every quarter so that you can keep course correcting over and over and over again. But what Brett did, because he recognized, I think, right away what he was dealing with, these 2 power kegs, powder kegs of people that were super impatient, he created like a good framework for us to actually debate in. And so we would crowdsource, we'd debate, and we'd make sure that the person could explain and express what was really happening. And then, if you could actually explain it, then you got it. Like if you can argue their argument just as well as they can to some degree, that's fine that you actually have some idea what they're talking about. And you can start to sit in their shoes a little bit. Also, not interrupting each other and not biting at each other and being sarcastic and rolling our eyes at each other. Like, not that we were doing a lot of that. We don't naturally do a lot of that, but you get a bunch more people in the room in these planning sessions, and there's just certain attitudinal things that don't work. Then all of a sudden you're arguing about the way that you're discussing stuff and you're arguing about all the other emotional stuff that's going on instead of actually talking about the real issues. So really also getting down, if you can strip away some of the crap that's distracting and that heightens emotions, then you can really start to dive in and get into the real issue and then really dissect it and very much understand it. And taking the time to do that, can't we just make the decision? Well, we can't make this decision if we haven't buy-in. If we don't have buy-in, then we could say this is what we're going to do, but then you're going to run off and do something else. So making sure you have that debate to the point where everyone says, yes, we're going to do this. And by the way, we're going to do this. And, you can't just leave this room and do something else. So then holding each other accountable instead of leaving the room and then someone eroding the thing that we agreed to because they don't agree with it. You do have to align. You do absolutely have to fall in line if you're going to do something incredible.
Yeah.
And it just slows you down. It costs you money if you don't.
I talked about that in one of my books called Meetings Suck, where I said, when you have the good discussions and the really good debate, when you leave the room, there has to be consensus. You can't walk back to your teams and say, well, we made a decision, but I disagree. It's like, stay in the room and keep working through it, right? So the other thing that when you're kind of operating at the level you're operating at and you're working so closely with the CEO, founder, and even other members of the leadership team is having, as you called it, the respectful debate or debating respectfully. Do you have the debate in front of others, or do you ever pull away and try to do it privately? And what's your thought process around that? I call it kind of mom and dad arguing, but not in front of the kids.
Oh my God. Yeah, I'd say early on we were terrible
at it. Yeah.
Oh my Lord, we were terrible at it. I was laughing, and you can see me squirm. Yeah, not just Matt and I, but you know, as the executive team, yeah, we had open debates and arguments around everybody on a regular basis. I mean, there's only 12 people. Like the first is only like a few people, like 3 and 12, and then 15 and 20. We definitely learned over time to keep our voices down and maybe put ourselves in an offsite and put ourselves in a different place. Even though we love each other, we are going to go at it. Yeah. It's just kind of the nature of our personalities. Sometimes I think we're a lot softer now on each other and ourselves and other people. I will say that after knowing each other for 20 years, we're both a lot more secure in who we are. We are a lot more comfortable in our own skin. Yeah. You know, and we've learned so much. And I got to give credit to Brett. Brett has been like, you know, a life coach and a business coach in a lot of ways. That's really important. Those softer skills really translate to building better culture. You can't build a great culture by ripping into each other and allowing other people to rip into each other. Because as soon as they actually realize that that's okay, then all of a sudden you got a bunch of, you know, people around, and then that just starts to really ruin the beauty, you know, of culture, and productivity starts to fail, and people aren't happy. And if people aren't happy and motivated, doesn't matter how much you pay them, you're not going to thrive.
No, like we need to be like, the CEO needs to be that chief energizing officer, right? And I speak about this in the book, The Second in Command, that mom and dad are supposed to fight and argue and debate, but not in front of the kids, because it scares the out of the kids, right? So the kids don't know that, oh, like mommy and daddy just actually had sex after they argued too. Like they still love each other, right? They were just passionately debating this thing. You know, not that you and Matt are out there, but, and by the way, now I realize why I know the name Brett Penniger. Brett was a guest on the Second in Command podcast, episode 123. You're going to be the first company in history to have 2 guests on the same podcast. So this will be interesting to go out. I'm like, I know the name Brett Penniger. I know the name Brett Penniger. So I literally pick up my phone and I had to Google it, and there it is. LiveIntent, episode number 123.
That's great.
Isn't that crazy?
Funny.
I will link to Brett's episode in this episode too. We'll cross-link the 2 of them.
Oh yeah.
It'll be really interesting to get this perspective from inside the organization. So you talked to us about kind of the early stage of what the business genesis was going to be. Is that what LiveIntent does now then? Are you in that, or is this a completely different business model today?
Yeah, the business, you know, it's evolved greatly. It's expanded a lot. You know, we started as just simply the first and only ad server that could work in email. That was enough right there. And we knew that New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, every major holding company and every major publisher that was sending emails or alerts or like whatever it was, transactional emails, that they had no way of actually serving ads in real time and doing what modern ad serving should do, which is make sure the right ad gets to the right person at the right time. And, you know, we've been saying that for years. It just didn't exist. So very simply being the first ad server that could actually work, and then building an exchange on top of it so we can aggregate all of the inventory from all of the publishers together into a biddable environment, building a DSP and a SSP, display side platform and supply side platform that can actually bid into the inventory so that advertisers can access, you know, the inventory, and then making sure that Google and Verizon and AOL and everybody else can also bid into the inventory so we get bid density. So on one side, you're monetizing email for publishers. On the other side, you're actually making it available for advertisers to come in and do advertising and marketing, right? So those are 2 sides of our business, and that is still the core of LiveIntent.
How did you fund LiveIntent?
Matt had raised a really decent amount of money. He learned early on. That is a big part of what Matt has always been really good at, is raising money. So he had raised a decent amount of money for LiveIntent 1.0. They spent about half of it and just could not find the market fit and a revenue model that would actually work. So when he asked me to come over, I was like, dude, we're both going to go down with the same ship. I was like, that's not going to work. Like, I don't try to explain how this makes money. He's like, I can't. He's like, try. And he was, and I was like, there's no market. So anyway, but then we came up with the idea, came up with 3 ideas, and they took this one because they looked at our background, like you two and email. That makes sense. It's like chocolate and peanut butter. That this totally makes sense. You two should go do this. They were very happy to be like, yeah, this is what you were born to do.
Why does chocolate? It's like, I love chocolate and peanut butter, but like it really doesn't make any sense going back that far, or did it? Because it's so fucking good. But like an Australian would think we're weird, right? Because they hate peanut butter. They must think it's like peanut butter and Vegemite. I don't know.
They secretly like peanut butter. They don't want us to know because they don't want us to think.
Yeah. And by the way, I did pay attention to everything you said about the business model, but chocolate and peanut butter is like squirrel, right?
I know.
It leads into a question though. And how many employees does LiveIntent have now?
I think we're at 270 right now.
Okay. So
right around there.
You're at a size of an organization where, you know, there's some politics and you've got like strong leaders and good funding. You've also got a lot of people with ideas and opinions, but you talk about focus. How do you say no to people that you like and respect, but maybe the idea is not now, or it is definitely a no?
Well, I think that you just brought up the number one way of actually saying no is timing. I would say that it's one of our biggest challenges was either Matt and I coming up with ideas or somebody else coming up with an idea and then discovering that it's too early. Or building it and then realizing you built it and no one's coming because it's too early. That's the most painful, or one of the most painful things in our work experience is that. So yeah, we're super protective now of running at something, creating a minimal viable product. If we think the timing is wrong, if we don't think we have the right resources to do it right, if we think it's bad revenue, I mean, we're going to build this thing. Yeah, we could actually make another millions of dollars, but then there's no defense of it. It's someone else is going to start doing it. It's going to maybe erode. And then we're going to have to make up for that revenue. So there's a lot of pieces that I think go into it, but we do spend a lot of time in planning, and we do it with cross-functional teams. We do it through the wisdom of the crowd, because you never know, like you introduce these ideas, when it gets to the point, we do bring it to cross-functional groups and say, all right, let's talk through this. And let's really prioritize. Is this really what you want? Is this really what we need to do? And can we build it? And how much does it cost? You know, how much engineering is it going to take? That's so hard to get engineering, and resources. So we're very, very, I think, measured. And then by the time we were done with the conversation, usually the person that had the idea, one isn't married to the idea, they're just married to coming up with ideas because we need ideas to build on. And so learning to actually let go of your own ideas, but then following the data, not opinion. If you're using data and analysis to come up with a yes, why a yes or no, then it's not a personal thing. I don't like your idea.
Yeah.
I think your opinion is off.
That's the old Google adage, right? I don't really care what your idea is or what your opinion is. What's the data say?
Exactly.
I'm sure they say it in a nicer way than that. I never say things properly. It's strange that I've ever been able to write a book because I can barely speak English. It's weird that I would ever write in English. How did you and Matt in the early days kind of divide and conquer who was going to handle what? And then as you scaled up and built out a leadership team, how do you continue to divide and conquer and decide who gets to do what?
Early on, my focus was around building out the sales team, building out the sales development function, for the team, then building out the account management. Because early on, there's no accounts. First off, we started with nothing, literally nothing. So trying to bring in supply and demand so that you can actually build the system to start off with, that was really hard. And so big part of my focus was actually bringing in the supply, bringing in the demand, coming up with the process by which we do that, who are we actually going to go after. And then I spend a lot of time with customers, and always have. So I spend a lot of time working with customers, it's usually, on the edge of new things that we're doing. And it's not like I'm getting deep into the core, but as we're building new stuff, and in the beginning it was all new stuff, is actually just being very close to the end customer and the prospect, and then iterating and helping feed information into product. Matt spends more time, and always has, on product engineering, the building, the architecture, and then also just, he is a wealth of ideas. Like Matt, even more than me, definitely he never stops. He never stops iterating. This ideas are always spinning off, just constantly spinning off. Even in things that we've already built or that we're building, before it's even built, there's new ideas coming out of it. Now that's a blessing and a curse. When we can't muck with it, we probably shouldn't be mucking with it anymore. We just make sure that Matt's focused on something else.
How do you decide when the customer feedback that we're getting, if the software could only do X, I'd be happy, or if the software could only do Y, I'd purchase? How do you know when that is true versus how to handle objections better and just get them to buy what we've got?
So one, I think most everybody in the company only sells what we have. We try not to divulge what we're building sometimes, especially early on, because we don't want people to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm the worst offender, but it's also my job. For instance, if one customer has an idea and I can't find 5 or 10 other people that are actually, oh, dude, that's a really interesting idea, I'm not going to build it. There's no way. And early on, it's so alluring. We had a huge top 2 telecom company early on. It was like, we started building LiveIntent. We need this. And we had to decide early on, it's like, are we going to build that? Or are we not going to build that? That's not core. And we did it a couple of times because it was 70% of our revenue.
Yeah.
And then we stopped. So we said no. And this is one of our tenets: say no to get to yes, say no to say yes. We do that all the time. We lost the client. I actually fired the client personally. Said, sorry, we can't do that. Oh, I know. Well, then we're not. I'm like, I'm aware. But you're going to walk away from us. I'm so and so, and we are. I was like, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to build that, and we're not going to condone this kind of behavior, because honestly, there's some real legal issues around. We're not going to do something that we think is going to potentially put us in danger right out of the gate. We're not going to do it. And so I think that's really important. You guys stick to your guns.
I used to coach a top tier cell phone provider, coach the CEO and the second in command at Sprint for 18 months. Was that your potential client?
I wouldn't tell you if it was.
They're both gone anyway. Like Marcelo Claret is no longer there, and Jamie Jones, who was their senior, is no longer there, but they sold to T-Mobile. But that's what I'm talking about, is these companies that seem so alluring with so many big ideas. Often it feels like these executives are just pushing paper and projects to stay busy versus having any intent of ever getting it to the finish line. How do you know if it's going to get to that finish line?
Well, I think you have to, first off, you have the deep purpose of building it in the first place. And the only thing worth building is something that's defensive, or that you can defend, but also is a big artery. It's got to be a big artery of opportunity. And it has to be something that can actually generate tens of millions of dollars, not something that's just going to be a little side project. So you have to be able to see something that others aren't seeing, and then quickly develop it, and then make sure that whatever that is that it is defensible, and not everybody can do it. In fact, maybe very few, if anybody, could do it. This stuff is still coming up. One thing I love about our business is that there's so many things that we can spin out of it. I don't think I'll ever be tired. I do not belong in a company that's not actually entrepreneurial and continuing to build.
No,
it's time for me to leave.
Yeah, you'd be horrible
for that.
You and I'd be horrible in the corporate world. Like, we would die inside of Sprint. Couple other questions. What was it like giving up the president role? You gave up the president role and moved into a chief business officer role. I'm guessing you were probably like 40 at the time,
Yeah. I've had to do that several times. The one thing I've gotten really good is firing myself and replacing myself with somebody else. And it's actually been something that I've done several times. Even as chief business officer, I'm actually I'm being hired and fired on a regular basis to build things. I was the chief people officer. I didn't change my title to chief people officer. I built out. The nice thing about that CBO role is that I'm the hired gun. If there's something that if Matt's like, this has to get done, he's like, oh, hey, Jason, can you go build the people org? We're going to go from 75 people to 150 people. And like 150 people, that's terrible. Oh, that's going to be scary, because all sorts of things go wrong at 150 if you read, So anyway, there's a lot of, about human condition and what happens when you have 150 relationships, numbers. And so, I was like, I actually left kind of the Rev org and left talking to customers and doing sales and doing all the stuff that I'm really proficient at to actually make sure that we weren't in a train wreck a year later, going from 50 to 150. The same feeling every time. So when I went from president to CBO, it's painful every time, because I fall in love with whatever I'm doing. And that is true, but I was a big part of the decisioning, because at the time we're like, okay, there's things that we need to do now as we're thinking about maybe, considering either eventually going public or being acquired. that is not my expertise. It's not something that I'm very good at. But as a very, decently large shareholder of a company, what's more important,
It's got to get
my
done.
ego
Yeah.
or solving the problem and actually making sure that I am not the reason why this company is not actually successful? And then moving into different things. When I first started doing the idea of building out the culture and the whole process around people and really understanding what that was, I've never read so much in my life. And I had so many amazing people around me, quickly trying to get me up to speed and understanding of what that would take from the whole organization, what it would take from me. And it was scary as hell for a long time. And then I started falling in love with it. I really, really do love change. I like that. I just like what it does. And it's painful every time, but I like the outcome. So I become addicted to it. But then when I had to go back into the Rev org and I had to start building out some other stuff, I mourned. I definitely mourned. It was hard.
That's
And
interesting.
it's okay. It can be painful, but that's usually just all ego. And I worked on killing my ego years ago.
It's
So
interesting. That's why I was guessing on the age side as well, because I think that's where some of the wisdom comes in. Last couple of questions. What do you think you've had to do over the years to really work on your skills? Like, what skills have you developed or had to work on cognizantly?
patience is probably the single largest thing, is actually kind of holding my tongue and thinking about things a little bit more deeply before I speak. My emotional intelligence has definitely climbed dramatically. I think being older has definitely helped, but also I've really worked hard. I've spent so much time, reading, debating, understanding people, understanding how to motivate people. I think early in my career, maybe I treated everybody more the same. I treated work people differently than I treated the people I loved. And it got in my way. I think my temper, early on in my career wasn't helping me. And those are the things that I actually worked super, super hard on, because I realized early on that it didn't work and got in my way. And then when I really started becoming softer on people and harder on issues, but was able to keep people more, still accountable, but listening, having more of an open mindset and actually not acting out of an inward mindset and the ego place, that really changed everything. It changed my relationship with my son. It changed my relationship with my wife, with my friends, my coworkers, my executive team. That's been the single most difficult journey, but the best journey. Focus on the issue, but sometimes maybe out of my own insecurities when I was younger, I was harder on people. It just didn't work. I wasn't getting the outcomes that I actually wanted to try and get, and wasn't developing the relationships that I wanted to develop. And so
Imagine that,
that
right?
took some work.
Imagine that. All right, let's go back to the 22-year-old Jason Oates. You're just kind of getting out in your career. What advice would you give the 22-year-old you that you know to be true today, but you wish you'd known back then?
So I think one of the things a 22-year-old is have the conversation around what is balance versus not balance. How important is balance? It depends on what you want to accomplish. If you want to build something that's never been built before, there's no balance early on. If you're really trying to establish yourself, like working your tail off. So I don't think you just get there through hard work. I think you have to get through smart work, and you have to find ways of actually finding moments where you can be present and moments where you can actually regenerate your energy, and finding healthy ways to do that and making sure you take time out of your every single day to do that. But is it really going to be full balance? If you're really trying to do something incredible, something extraordinary, I'm not talking about doing just a corporate job where it's, all right, this is what you do. You do this, this, and this every day. That's different. That's actually pretty easy to work 9 to 5. If you're an entrepreneur and you're building something or creating something that's never been done before, so I would say, it's going to be a little bit lopsided, but in that time where you can be present with yourself and be kind to yourself without relying, say, on alcohol or just something else.
Yeah.
But finding that way where you can have an activity that is presencing for you. There are times where you have to cut some things out and then really fully focus. I would say to somebody, work your tail off, work harder than you've ever worked in your life, but find some way of finding peace, so that when you do take a break, you're literally really taking a mental break and you're refueling. Oh, here's the other one. You can work really hard, but sleep. I got that wrong. I didn't sleep enough. And that affected my mood, that affected my memory and my energy.
Yeah.
So sleep, try to, I would say that's really important.
Love that. I think about the balance, like you're like on a teeter-totter in a little way. Like you'll never be perfectly flat. Just allow the weaving back and forth a little bit, right? Like balancing on a surfboard. It's not perfectly flat. You got to kind of enjoy the rolls too. So Jason Oates, Chief Business Officer for LiveIntent. Thanks so much for sharing with us on the Second Command podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
But they almost need to teach all their employees to start living within their means, which is something that
Oh,
this
interesting.
generation has forgotten to do. But, you know, the Gen X, maybe not even so much Gen X, but certainly the baby boomers and above, they understood that. Like they had money coming in, they budgeted, they lived within their means, they cut,